I was sitting at an auction in one of the most exquisite halls of Washington, circa 1921. Around me, whispers circulated among the aristocracy and bohemian crowd, all gathered here in search of something unique and rare. The hall I found myself in was adorned with heavy curtains, and the light from crystal chandeliers softly illuminated the antique furniture. The air carried the scent of expensive tobacco and subtle perfume, transporting me to an era of luxury and refinement. Among the attendees, I noticed well-known collectors, art patrons, and some individuals whose faces seemed familiar from newspaper articles about high society. They exchanged nods, smiles, sometimes engaging in short but lively dialogues. Their clothing, accessories, manners, everything about them revealed people accustomed to the finer things in life. My gaze wandered around the hall as I awaited my moment. Several lots had already been presented at the auction, from rare books to unique works of art, each finding its buyer among those gathered. But I had come for something special, and finally, my moment arrived. The auctioneer proudly announced the next lot, an old map indicating an ancient tomb in Egypt. My heart skipped a beat. This map was the reason I was here. A friend, an archaeologist, had told me about it, suggesting that it might indeed show the true coordinates of the tomb. As the auctioneer carefully extracted the map from its envelope, a tense silence enveloped the hall. On the dimly lit stage, he unfolded the document before us, revealing a hand-drawn but remarkably detailed depiction of the path and location of the ancient tomb. I was particularly drawn to the jackal's head in the corner of the map, the symbol of the god Anubis, which only fueled my desire to acquire it. "The starting bid is $500, the auctioneer announced in his resonant voice, a significant sum for that time. To my right, a woman in an exquisite evening gown immediately raised her hand, offering $550. Following her, a man in the center of the hall confidently raised the bid to $600. Without hesitation, I joined the bidding, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The bids continued to escalate, like invisible waves sweeping through the entire hall. And then, when the price reached almost $1,000, another man entered the fray. His appearance was not pleasant. Thick dark eyebrows, roughly trimmed hair, and a roughly tailored suit that made him look like a cheap detective villain. There was determination in his eyes, but I was not about to back down. Our competition quickly became personal, bids coming one after another without the slightest hesitation. Finally, when I shouted $2,000, he hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The auctioneer, after a few agonizing seconds without a higher bid, brought down the gavel. "Sold for $2,000. My heart swelled with triumph, while the man, my recent opponent, shot me a venomous glance full of resentment and disappointment. He decisively rose and, without looking back, left the room, leaving behind a trail of tension. Meanwhile, I sat there, tasting the flavor of the impending adventure, anticipating unraveling the mystery hidden within my newly acquired purchase. Upon returning home, I immediately reached for the phone to contact the archaeologist who had told me about the map. His name was Jonathan Ellis, known for his research on ancient Egyptian civilization, and had recently returned from an expedition in the Valley of the Kings. Soon after my call, Jonathan arrived. Of average height, with a penetrating gaze and a slightly unkempt beard, he looked like a typical enthusiast scientist, fully immersed in his work. We spread the map on a large table in my library and began analyzing each symbol on it. The map was hand-drawn, with intricately depicted images, yet the details were surprisingly accurate. The jackal's head, symbolizing the god Anubis, indicated the importance of the location in question. We carefully studied and compared the map with modern cartographic data and ancient texts, allowing us to roughly determine the search area. However, the exact location of the tomb would have to be determined on site in Egypt, relying on the signs and symbols indicated on the map. After lengthy discussions and planning, I decided to organize an expedition. Jonathan enthusiastically supported this idea, offering his assistance in assembling the necessary team of specialists, as well as organizing all the equipment needed for excavation and research. A month after the preparations began, we met at the port of New York, where I personally met the team we had meticulously assembled with Jonathan. They were outstanding specialists: cartographer David Thompson, engineer Michael Black, anthropologist Elizabeth Harper, and photographer James Foster. After introductions and discussing the final details, we began loading our equipment, provisions, and personal belongings onto the ship. Our vessel, named the Adventurer, was a small but reliable research steamer, equipped for long sea voyages. It was outfitted with everything necessary for comfortable living and working on board: spacious cabins for the crew, research and scientific equipment, as well as a reliable navigation system. Once the last crate was loaded on board, we gathered on the deck of the Adventurer. Looking at each other, we knew we stood on the threshold of an incredible adventure. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, bathing the waters of the harbor in golden light, and soon the ship slowly departed from the dock, heading out into the open sea. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean proved surprisingly calm. Our ship reliably and gracefully cut through the waves, despite being laden with all the necessities for the expedition. Thanks to the experienced captain and the coordinated work of the crew, we avoided any incidents. Days on board were filled with sea air, sunshine, and the endless horizon, while nights were adorned with a starry sky, so pure and bright that it could only be seen on the open sea. Approaching the Strait of Gibraltar marked a significant milestone in our journey. This maritime passage not only separates Europe and Africa, but also serves as symbolic gates between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. We made a stop in the port for refueling and acquiring additional supplies. Gibraltar welcomed us with its rocky shores and bustling harbor, where cultures and languages mingled, creating a unique atmosphere of hospitality and diversity. After a short stop, we continued our journey along the picturesque coasts of southern Europe, enjoying the views of Spain, France, and Italy. The Mediterranean Sea welcomed us with its warm waters and mild climate, allowing our ship to glide smoothly across its surface. Finally, we reached the port of Alexandria. This ancient city, founded by Alexander the Great, greeted us with its historical aura. From cargo ships to fishing boats, from yachts to large freighters, the seaport was filled with a variety of maritime vessels. The air was filled with the scent of the sea, spices, and adventures, heralding the beginning of a new stage in our journey. After docking, the process of unloading equipment and supplies from the Adventurer began. Crates, devices, and gear were carefully transferred ashore and loaded onto waiting trucks. The air of the port was filled with the sounds of work, shouts of stevedores, the hum of engines, and the squeak of wheels. Once the unloading was complete, we headed into the city, where rooms had already been reserved in one of Alexandria's finest hotels. The city, with its rich history from ancient times to the present day, was a mosaic of cultures and epochs. Driving through its streets, you could see ancient ruins against the backdrop of elegant 19th-century European facades, testifying to the city's centuries-old heritage. The hotel where we stayed was a magnificent building, combining the best features of Eastern hospitality and European comfort. Its wide marble staircases and high ceilings adorned with luxurious chandeliers created an atmosphere of luxury and elegance. In the hotel lobby, where the coolness and quiet contrasted with the outside bustle, an unexpected incident occurred. As we were checking in at the reception, a man passed by, whom I didn't recognize at first. However, when he turned to look at us, I suddenly remembered his face. It was the same man from the auction who had competed with me for the ancient tomb map. The moment our eyes met was filled with incomprehension and suspicion. What could have brought him to Alexandria at the same time as us? Was it just a coincidence, or was he following us, trying to find the same tomb? Questions swirled in my mind, but without answers, I decided to keep these speculations to myself. Entering my room, I tried to distract myself from the encounter and focus on the upcoming tasks. The room was spacious and cozy, with a balcony overlooking the magnificent view of the Mediterranean coast. That night, the silence of the hotel corridors was suddenly disrupted. I was awakened by loud noises and muffled voices from the neighboring room where Jonathan was staying. I jumped out of bed and, approaching the door, cautiously looked out into the corridor. There I saw a masked man hurrying away from Jonathan's room. A moment later, Jonathan himself rushed out, looking disheveled and clearly alarmed. Rushing to Jonathan, I asked what had happened. He quickly explained that a thief had broken into his room, clearly looking for something. My expedition companions quickly gathered around us, drawn by the noise. We entered Jonathan's room, where there were clear signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, scattered papers. Jonathan explained that upon waking up, he had seen a stranger prowling around the room and had immediately engaged in a scuffle with him. Discussing what had happened, we concluded that the thief was most likely searching for the map of the ancient tomb. Remembering yesterday's encounter with the stranger in the lobby, I felt that my intuition had been justified. I told the others that, anticipating possible danger, I had taken the map with me and hidden it securely in my room. Soon the hotel security arrived, but unfortunately they couldn't catch the thief. After they left, we conferred and decided that we needed to be more cautious and attentive to our safety and the preservation of valuable discoveries. At dawn the next day, our expedition was ready to depart. We loaded all the necessary equipment, supplies, and excavation tools into the vehicles, and also provided space for the local residents whom we had hired to assist with the excavations. We left the city, moving along the majestic Nile, which sparkled in the morning sunlight. The landscape around us gradually changed, revealing new views of Egypt. Upon arriving at the ferry crossing, we easily crossed the river on a ferry, which became a kind of ritual transition from the bustling civilization to the mysterious world of ancient secrets. Leaving the banks of the Nile behind, our path led westward, towards the vast sandy expanses and rocky stretches of the desert. Following the ancient map, we searched for landmarks indicated on it. Passing by an abandoned quarry, we found markings indicating the need to turn south. The terrain here became increasingly hilly, and the path became difficult to traverse. At one point, one of the trucks got stuck in the sand, and we spent some time getting it unstuck. After several tense days of traveling through the desert, we finally reached the edge of the valley, which we dubbed the Valley of Stars because of its seclusion and the breathtaking beauty of the night sky. It was surrounded by high sand dunes, creating a sense of isolation from the world. Here our expedition set up camp. In the first few days, we engaged in lively discussions about the possible location of the entrance to the tomb. The valley was almost entirely buried under the sand, and we realized that we would have to conduct extensive excavations. A week of hard work passed. Workers, armed with shovels and other tools, diligently dug through the sand under the scorching sun, but so far without success. To expedite the process, we organized additional supply deliveries and hired more workers. During those days, our camp was filled with tense anticipation and hopes for a soon discovery. One evening, as I sat in the tent studying the ancient map with Jonathan, joyful shouts from outside immediately caught our attention. Michael burst into the tent, his face lit up with joy, and he excitedly announced that the entrance had been found. We instantly jumped up and ran to the source of the cries. Arriving at the scene, we found workers gathered around a small hole in the rock, which had previously been hidden beneath layers of sand. The entrance to the tomb was small, barely allowing an adult to squeeze inside. It led down a narrow corridor carved into the rock, which we presumed would lead us to the main part of the tomb. The entrance was adorned with a massive stone block, upon which ancient hieroglyphs and images were engraved, including the symbol of Anubis, the god of the dead, further reinforcing our assumption of the significance of this place. Despite centuries spent under the sands, the engravings remained remarkably clear, testifying to the skill of their creators. After the entrance to the tomb was discovered, our expedition decided to wait until morning to begin exploring the interior chambers. During this time, Elizabeth and Jonathan delved into studying the hieroglyphs and images engraved on the stone block at the entrance, while our photographer took detailed photos of each symbol and pattern to document them for future analysis. The next morning, with the first rays of sunlight illuminating the sands of the valley, we gathered at the entrance to the tomb. Armed with torches and the necessary research equipment, we prepared to step into the threshold of the ancient world. Jonathan, as our scientific leader and lead archaeologist, entered first. Michael followed him, and I followed closely behind. We squeezed through the narrow opening and crawled along the corridor, which led us deeper into the dark and forgotten chambers of the tomb. The corridor led us into a large chamber, in the center of which stood an imposing stone door. Our torches cast a flickering light on the walls, revealing richly decorated surfaces adorned with hieroglyphs. At the center of the door proudly loomed the image of the ancient god Anubis, the guardian of the dead, executed with astonishing detail and craftsmanship. Jonathan, with his profound knowledge of ancient Egyptian history and language, immediately set to work deciphering the inscriptions. He moved slowly along the walls, carefully examining each symbol. We watched his work, barely breathing in anticipation of the revelation. However, the deciphering took longer than we had thought. About an hour later, the translation was ready, and here is what it said. Beneath the sands where silence reigns, a chamber hidden, sealed, contains. Enter not this sacred hall, disturb not the peace, heed our call. For those who dare to cross the line, awake the curse by design. Respect the sleep of ages past, or bear the curse long to last. Guarded by the jackal's gaze, through endless nights and sunlit days. This warning here in stone is cast, beware, the shadow you may cast. Tread lightly, keep the silence deep, honor the ones in eternal sleep. For if the ancient wrath you wake, a dire fate your soul shall take. The warning engraved at the entrance to the tomb, although carrying a threat of a curse, slightly scared us but did not deter us. We were people of science, not prone to superstition, and well aware that such warnings were often used in ancient times as a means to deter potential tomb raiders. Soon our engineer joined us, and together we began to brainstorm ways to open the massive stone door without causing harm to the contents of the tomb. This task proved to be challenging and required several days of intense work, applying engineering knowledge and innovative approaches. Finally, the day came when the door yielded to our efforts and slowly swung open, providing us access inside. Before us stretched a corridor disappearing into darkness. With torches in hand, we cautiously stepped inside, realizing that we were entering territory untouched for centuries. As we traversed the corridor, we soon realized that it was part of a complex labyrinth, possibly intended to confuse or entangle unwanted visitors. We moved forward, leaving markers behind to ensure our way back. After navigating the winding path through the labyrinth, we finally reached the first chamber. It was a spacious room, its walls also adorned with hieroglyphs and bas-reliefs depicting the life and achievements of the one buried in this tomb. At the center of the room stood a statue, but it was no ordinary statue. It was an image of Anubis, the god of the dead, crafted with extraordinary detail and realism. The statue was not just a figure standing at rest. It seemed poised for action, with one paw raised as if guarding the entrance to the rooms beyond this chamber. The statue's eyes were inlaid with precious stones, which, in the flickering light of our torches, created an illusion of a living gaze, full of warning. Between the front paws lay something that at first seemed like a typical staff, but upon closer inspection turned out to be a snake coiled around the staff, with its head directed straight at us. This added an even more ominous and mystical aspect to the statue. Around the statue, on the floor, was depicted a circle of hieroglyphs and symbols resembling spells or warnings. Some of them clearly indicated curses intended for those who would disturb the sacred rest of this place. At the center of this circle, right under the statue, was a small depression containing objects resembling ancient ritual instruments. We were thrilled with the discovery. After carefully examining the room and the statue, we decided to continue our search. As we cautiously made our way through the winding corridors of the labyrinth, suddenly, from behind, I heard a cry of pain. It was Michael. He was lying on the floor, clutching his leg, from which an arrow protruded, and blood was flowing profusely from the wound. At that moment, we realized that the tomb was equipped with ancient traps, ready to punish anyone who dared to disturb its peace. We surrounded Michael with concern, realizing that immediate action was necessary. We carefully lifted him, trying to minimize his suffering, and dragged him towards the exit of the labyrinth. However, Jonathan, despite the incident, decided to stay and continue the exploration. I was against it, but he insisted, promising to be careful. Upon reaching the surface, we immediately began to treat the wound, trying to stop the bleeding and prevent infection. But soon Michael's fever rose, and it became clear that qualified medical assistance was needed. It was decided to immediately head to the nearest hospital. We loaded him into the truck, and James, our photographer, took the wheel, soon driving off, raising dust high. We decided not to descend yet and waited for our chief archaeologist. But time passed, and he was still not back. We started to get nervous. Our anthropologist Elizabeth paced nervously in circles, and I couldn't sit still either. As evening approached, we decided to head to the tomb, but then Jonathan emerged from it. We rushed to him, asking why he was so late. He apologized and said that he had discovered a new chamber, but an incident had occurred there. It was a room where stone jackal heads hung on the walls, he began his tale. And in the center of the room was an altar with a bowl filled with liquid. I was surprised that the liquid hadn't evaporated over thousands of years. Approaching closer, I saw that there was some creature floating in it, resembling a water beetle, and it was glowing green. As I marveled at this sight, suddenly smoke began to emanate sharply from the jackal heads on the walls. I got scared and tried to run out of the room, but then I felt dizzy and lost consciousness. When I woke up, the smoke had already dissipated, but the worst part was that the bowl was shattered. The liquid spilled on the floor, and the creature was gone. Then I got up and decided to return. With worry in our hearts, we listened to his story, and then returned to our camp, where we began to discuss what had happened. As night fell, we went to sleep. Deep in the night, Elizabeth woke me up, reporting anxiously that moans could be heard from Jonathan's tent. Rising, I hurried to him to make sure he was okay. Entering the tent, I immediately noticed that Jonathan was lying there, covered in sweat, his condition causing concern. Touching his forehead, I felt that he had a high fever. Without delay, we took action, gave him medicine, and began applying wet compresses in an attempt to ease his condition. The whole night passed like this. We alternated compresses, trying to lower his temperature, and made sure he drank enough fluids. By morning, to our relief, Jonathan's fever had subsided, and he was feeling much better. We were ready to breathe a sigh of relief after a restless night, but another, much heavier, news hit us. James returned to camp with a message that shocked us all like thunder on a clear day. Our engineer Michael had passed away in the hospital from the injuries he sustained. This news stunned and worried each of us. In the silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant sounds of the desert, we realized how fragile life is and how unexpected twists of fate can be. As a sign of respect and memory of Michael, we unanimously decided to temporarily suspend the excavations. Gathering together, we held a memorial service to pay our respects and commemorate the soul of our comrade. Michael was to be buried in the local cemetery. I personally promised to find a way to help Michael's family, provide them with support, and ensure that they would not be in need after the loss. We spent that day in silent mourning, remembering Michael, his smile, his passion for work, and how much he contributed to the success of our expedition. His contribution, as well as his friendliness, will forever remain in our hearts. On the next day after the sad news about Michael, our team gathered together to discuss the next steps. The death of our comrade served as a harsh reminder of the dangers that could lurk in the depths of ancient tombs. We unanimously decided to exercise maximum caution in our explorations to avoid any additional risks. Armed with reinforced safety measures, we descended back into the tomb. After traversing the familiar labyrinth, we carefully examined its structure and made a rough sketch to better navigate its winding corridors. Then we visited the room where Jonathan had lost consciousness, hoping to discover something new. But unfortunately, no discoveries were made. Continuing our search, we soon stumbled upon several chambers where ancient vases and various household items stood on shelves and in niches. Each of these artifacts was meticulously studied and documented. These items were invaluable finds, allowing us to learn more about the lives and culture of the people who lived during the creation of the tomb. As we continued our investigations in search of hidden passages or doors, we spent another month in the tomb, meticulously exploring every corner of this labyrinth. One day, while inspecting the statue of Anubis in the very first room, Elizabeth noticed the snake depicted on the staff lying at the statue's feet. She examined the snake carefully, trying to uncover its secrets of craftsmanship and meaning. Inspired by intuition, Elizabeth decided to touch the snake. Accidentally pulling it, she felt that the staff was not very securely attached. Pulling it again, a slight earthquake suddenly occurred around us. The statue shifted from its place along with part of the wall, revealing an entrance to an unknown chamber. We were shocked by this discovery. For a moment, forgetting all the dangers and warnings, we hurried to explore the new space that had been hidden behind the tomb wall for so many centuries. Armed with torches and all the necessary equipment for exploration, we cautiously entered the chamber. The new chamber turned out to be a spacious hall, its walls adorned with intricate reliefs and hieroglyphs, depicting the deeds and travels of the pharaoh in whose honor the tomb was created. In the center of the hall stood an altar, crowned with yet another statue of Anubis, but in a different pose, symbolizing protection and eternal rest. Around the altar were various ritual objects and vessels, likely containing food and drinks for the deceased's journey into the afterlife. Enveloped in a keen sense of curiosity, we meticulously explored the new chamber, noting every symbol, every relief on its walls. Soon we noticed that at the end of the room, another passage was visible. Carefully passing through it, we found ourselves in a hall that instantly came alive with golden hues under the light of our torches. Reflections from numerous golden treasures illuminated every corner, creating the sensation that we had stepped into the heart of the sun. The room was filled with treasures beyond imagination. Golden figurines of gods and pharaohs, adorned with precious stones, exquisite jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings, studded with lapis lazuli, malachite, and carnelian, among others. Among other treasures were also golden vessels and utensils, which were likely used in rituals or in the daily life of ancient Egyptians. In this chamber, each item told its own story, revealing to us the secrets of the ancient world, its art and beliefs. It was an incredible discovery that surpassed all our expectations and dreams. We began to carefully study these treasures, trying to understand their origin, purpose, and significance. Soon realizing the exceptional value of the find, we decided to bring some of the treasures to the surface so that they could be properly documented and studied. Every step in this process was taken with the utmost caution to ensure the preservation of these priceless artifacts for future generations. As darkness fell, we paused our work. After having dinner, we sat around the campfire discussing our incredible find. The excitement of the discovery was mixed with the fatigue of a long day. But soon exhaustion took its toll, and one by one, we retired to our tents to rest and gather strength for new explorations. Suddenly, deep in the night, I was awakened by a strange noise outside. Opening my eyes, I felt a cold fear as I saw the barrel of a gun in front of me. In my tent stood a man who ordered me to get up and follow him. Stepping out of the tent, I discovered that our camp had been taken over. Bandits had gathered all our people and weapons in one place. I was led to the leader, who stood examining the golden treasures we had found. As I approached, he turned to me, and I recognized in him the man from the auction. My suspicions that he was not just a random traveler were confirmed. Perhaps among our people was someone who was indeed informing him of our discoveries. His smile was cold and calculating. He thanked me for the work done and promised not to kill us if we continued our exploration and opened other rooms for him. I was furious at this turn of events, but at the same time, I understood that I had to act wisely to save the lives of my people. With a heavy heart, I agreed to his terms. While the bandits were busy loading the treasures onto trucks, Jonathan, Elizabeth, and I were taken back to the tomb. Passing through the room where we found the golden treasures, it was painful to see the remnants of wealth being carried away so unceremoniously. But with guns pointed at us, we were powerless to change anything. Armed bandits insisted on continuing the exploration, and soon we discovered another door behind the room with the treasures, which was locked. A careful examination revealed the presence of a secret lock, made in the form of plates with images acting as buttons. After a thorough examination, we identified a certain sequence. Pressing 4 images, we felt a slight tremor, and the door slowly swung open, raising a cloud of dust. Inside awaited us a vast chamber, in the center of which stood an ancient sarcophagus, richly adorned with carvings and hieroglyphs. On either side of it stood statues of Anubis, and the room was framed by majestic columns. But the most astonishing sight was yet to come. At the entrance to the tomb lay a huge creature, which at first glance seemed like simply a mound of fur. Approaching closer, we watched in amazement as this mound suddenly stirred. Before we could realize the danger, the bandits pushed us aside, advancing forward with greed. We, left behind, could only watch events unfold, awaiting the outcome. Then they noticed that the creature had stirred, and then slowly stood up on its hind legs. Now we could see it in detail. It was a humanoid, entirely covered in black fur, with a sharp face resembling a jackal's muzzle. Its mouth was covered with rows of huge, sharp teeth, and its eyes were large and glowing green. The creature exuded ancientness. It was evident that it had lived a very long life. When it stood on its hind legs and bending its front ones began to growl, we all felt fear. The bandits, overwhelmed with horror, instinctively aimed their weapons at the creature. But suddenly it unexpectedly jumped on one of the bandits and sank its teeth into his throat, almost tearing his head off. Blood gushed like a river. The remaining bandits opened fire. A hail of bullets pierced the creature's body, which, exploding with rage, jumped at the next opponent. The fire continued. When the creature finished with the second man, it wanted to jump on the third, but the hail of bullets was too great. Roaring with rage and helplessness, it fell to the ground and moved no more. When the lifeless creature collapsed to the ground, everyone present breathed a sigh of relief. The remaining bandits began to check on their wounded and killed comrades. Seeing this, I noticed that everyone was deeply frightened, especially the most superstitious of the bandits. Their former confidence had completely evaporated. I myself felt shocked by what had happened and exchanged glances with my colleagues, who were equally stunned. The question arose, what was this creature? Could it be that the ancient myths were true? Soon the bandits gathered their strength, and their leader ordered to continue the exploration. We approached the sarcophagus, where the bandits, without any ceremony, pushed back the lid. Looking inside, we felt horror again. There lay a man with the head of a jackal, a mummy, which still retained flesh, presenting a horrific sight beyond imagination. It seemed as if before us lay the god Anubis himself. This discovery was shocking. Gazing at the mummy, it seemed to me as if it would come to life any moment. The idea that before us lay not just a mummy, but some creature possessing magical power and protecting the tomb, seemed too real. The leader of the bandits, with a demand in his voice, brought everyone to their senses and ordered to continue exploring the huge hall. Splitting up, we began to inspect it. Behind the columns, boxes with treasures were discovered, which delighted the bandits. Meanwhile, I continued to survey the room, contemplating a plan of escape or actions against the bandits, who had started to haul the treasure chests outside. Soon the room quickly filled with people. Elizabeth, Jonathan, and I approached the sarcophagus to take another look at the mummy. As I looked at it, I was again struck by its horrifying appearance. Suddenly, a bad feeling came over me. I glanced at Elizabeth, who stood trembling, her gaze fixed on the mummy's hand. Not understanding why she was so frightened, I also turned my gaze in the same direction and suddenly saw the mummy's finger twitch. That truly scared me. Elizabeth grabbed my hand. Jonathan, not understanding what we were afraid of, stood still, unable to tear his gaze away from the mummy. As it continued to stare at the mummy, his eyes widened with fear, and when the mummy began to move, as if waking from a long sleep, his movements were so realistic, as if it had only slept for a few hours, starting to move its joints and turn its head. Suddenly the mummy stood up and looked around. Then it glanced at Jonathan. Meanwhile, the surrounding bandits, completely absorbed in the gold, did not see what was happening. We retreated further and further, and I whispered, trying to call Jonathan to follow us. But he seemed frozen in place, unable to look away from the mummy. The creature looked around again, clearly displeased with the disturbance of its rest, and then its eyes lit up with a sinister light, and it looked at Jonathan, and I swear, it smiled. It was the most terrifying sight I had ever seen. The jackal-headed figure grinned. I was no longer whispering but shouting, trying to get Jonathan to move away, but he seemed rooted to the spot, unable to take his eyes off the mummy. Suddenly a call, like a cry, emanated from under the creature, and we felt a slight earthquake. It seemed like everyone heard it, including the bandits, who paused for a moment and finally noticed the sarcophagus. The leader of the bandits, distracted from the gold, also saw what was happening and froze in horror. He ordered everyone to grab their weapons, but then something happened that no one expected and everyone was shocked. Jonathan suddenly began to tremble, and then his body was covered in green light. He writhed in pain, and fur began to appear on his body, his fingers elongated, forming large claws. His face began to change, elongating, and his teeth sharpening. It was evident that he was experiencing unimaginable pain. Soon before us stood a creature similar to the one the bandits had shot earlier. It straightened up and, raising its head, howled, filling the hall with the echo of its cry. We all stood in shock, unable to believe our eyes. Out of fear, one of the bandits fired a shot, which was then echoed by others. The room filled with the roar of gunfire, but the creature that Jonathan had turned into deftly dodged the bullets. With one powerful leap, it attacked the nearest bandit. Unlike the previous werewolf, this one was full of strength, and it only took one jump to kill the first bandit, tearing his head off. Then it systematically attacked the second and third, killing them one by one. Panic spread among the bandits. Realizing that we needed to run, I grabbed Elizabeth's hand and rushed towards the exit. One of the bandits nearby was stunned by what was happening. Taking advantage of the moment, I wrested the rifle from his hands. He didn't have time to react before I hit him in the jaw. We ran further, and it seemed that in the chaos around us, no one paid attention to us. All the noise and screams were drowned out by the sounds of gunfire. As we ran out of the room into the labyrinth, we realized why there had been an earthquake. The walls of the labyrinth had shifted, changing its configuration, and we couldn't find the way out. The path we had previously memorized now led nowhere, creating new dead ends and corridors. Looking around, we tried to orient ourselves in the altered space, understanding that every mistake could cost us our lives. We ran in search of an exit, hearing cries of pain and terror, as well as growling not far from us. In this chaos, unexpectedly from around the corner, the leader of the gang rushed out, and we collided, both falling to the ground. He was faster than me, wrested the rifle from my hands, and aimed it at me. I raised my hands, showing that I wasn't going to resist, but suddenly the torches on the walls went out, enveloping us in absolute darkness. Somewhere nearby, there was a sinister growl and heavy breathing. In the darkness, I felt for Elizabeth's hand and pulled her along, trying to move in the opposite direction from the source of the sounds. As we moved away, I soon noticed flashes of gunfire in the distance, accompanied by shots and screams. That creature had caught up with the leader of the gang at the other end of the tunnel. Seeing the light from the torches, I ran towards them with all my might. Fortunately, soon before me, the exit to the surface opened up. Emerging outside together with Elizabeth, we found ourselves facing a multitude of rifle barrels aimed at us. They were the remaining bandits, who, bewildered and not understanding what was happening, looked at us. One of them asked what had happened. I replied that we needed to flee, to which he waved it off as nonsense and ordered us to join the other prisoners standing near the camp. At that moment, it was clear to me that the bandits had lost their leader and were disoriented, not knowing how to proceed. As I approached my people, I whispered to James to be ready for a quick departure in the truck. This order was quietly relayed to everyone, and we were ready to act. Soon, a howl sounded, and we saw all the bandits rushing towards the entrance of the tomb. Realizing that this was our chance, I ordered everyone to load into the vehicles. Watching the events at the tomb, I saw the creature emerge from it, starting its slaughter among the bandits amidst the sounds of gunfire and screams of terror. Shocked by what was happening, I turned around and saw that my people were already finishing loading into the vehicles. Making sure no one was left behind, I ran after them when suddenly I felt a sharp pain in my back and was thrown several meters. My vision blurred and I couldn't understand what had happened. Next to me there was a growl, and the creature leaned over me, blood and saliva dripping from its jaws. I thought it was the end for me when suddenly a plaintive cry rang out, "Jonathan, please, no!" It was Elizabeth. The creature looked in her direction, then back at me. With my last strength, I whispered, "Jonathan, please." Suddenly, in its eyes, I saw a spark of reason, and the creature stepped back, heading back towards the tomb. My people rushed to me and helped me up. Then we all got into the trucks and drove away. As we began to ascend the dune, an earthquake began. The truck driver I was with stepped on the gas, trying to escape the valley. With difficulty, he succeeded, and finally, we got out of there. Looking back one last time at the place where now only sands remained, hiding my friend, my heart ached with pain. This expedition had turned into one of the most horrific incidents of my life. Glancing inside the truck, I saw the gold we had found, but it no longer brought me joy, only heaviness and sorrow. We slowly moved through the desert, and I looked at the starry, clear, and beautiful sky, feeling like a tiny speck in this vast world. In the silence of the night, under the endless dome of stars, I vowed never to forget my friend and the horror that occurred here.